Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. In the Elder Scrolls games, we've explored much of the continent of Tamriel, from the volcanic ashlands of Morrowind through to the Heartland of Cyrodiil and the icy tundra of Skyrim. But Tamriel is just one continent on the wide world of Nirn, and there are other, stranger lands beyond the horizon. We have yet to see these places in the flesh, but through scraps of text and dialogue, it's possible to start piecing together the puzzle of what lies beyond the shores of Tamriel. Much of this is rumour and speculation, and I will need to make a few assumptions to fill in the blanks, but what emerges are lands which are as mysterious, dangerous, and awe-inspiring as the continent we have come to know and love. If you have your own theories about the lands we're about to explore, feel free to share them in the comments below. And while you're there, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. It really helps to appease the gods of the algorithm. Now sit back, relax, and prepare to embark on a voyage to the mist-shrouded lands beyond the sea. Our first voyage carries us north, across the frigid Sea of Ghosts, to the forgotten, frozen land beyond. This is the continent of Atmora, the Elder Wood, thought to be where all the races of men originated long ages ago. Though it is now a frozen waste, it was not always so, and in the Elder days it was a verdant and fertile land. The vast landscape was made up of tundra, marshes and mountains, though it was mostly dominated by a great forest known as the Frostwood. This was a land of giants, and it's thought that the early inhabitants of Atmora carried giants' blood in their veins, making them much taller than the humans we know today. Many creatures made their home in this land, from giant snow bears to strange goats that walked upright and feasted on the flesh of men. The ancient Atmorans revered these animals, creating a totemic religion based on their worship. Above all other animals were the dragons, whom the Atmorans praised and feared in equal measure. Over time, the dragon cult became the dominant faith on the continent, and the dragon priests laid down laws that kept peace between dragons and men. Although their rule was firm, they were less tyrannical than their counterparts in Skyrim, who harshly subjugated the people and ruled over them with an iron fist. The greatest son of Atmora was Ysgramor, who led his 500 companions across the sea to Skyrim. In a great crusade, they defeated the Snow Elves who had dwelt there since time immemorial, and took Skyrim for their own. This resulted in the almost total genocide of the Snow Elves, who were driven underground by the rampaging Atmorans, and then cruelly betrayed by the Dwemer who had offered them refuge. The Snow Elves were dead. In their place were born the Falmer, blind, savage creatures that are a pale shadow of their ancestors. The Atmorans led by Ysgramor were the ancestors of the Nords who still inhabit the province today, and Atmora continues to occupy a unique place in the Nordic imagination. It's often assumed that the people of Atmora were tribal, even primitive. But the text, Songs of the Return, mentions the Atmorans having massive shipyards and academies, implying that their culture was far more sophisticated, perhaps even rivaling the great civilizations in Tamriel. Scholars are divided as to whether humankind originated in Atmora or Tamriel, but it's clear that in the Merethic era, the humans of Atmora were far more advanced than their counterparts in Tamriel, who often found themselves lorded over by elven powers such as the Aelids or the Dureni. In Skyrim, the Atmorans would found great cities such as Windhelm and Whiterun, and relics of the original Atmoran civilization can still be seen today. One merely needs to look to the skyline of Whiterun to see Jorvaskr, a grand mead hall built from the remains of one of the original ships of Ysgramor's migration. But as the Nordic civilization rose in Skyrim, their ancestral homeland in Atmora began to fall into decline. Over time, the summers in Atmora grew shorter, while the winters were longer and harsher. This slow-burning disaster was known as the Frostfall, and would result in the continent's doom. It eventually became clear that the frostfall would not abate, and that the continent would soon be unable to support complex society. It's not exactly clear when Atmora was entirely abandoned. Some legends say that Talos himself was born there, which would mean it was still settled during the late Second Era, though others believe the slow decline began around the same time as Isgrimmor's departure in the First. It's often assumed that the frostfall was a natural event, the result of shifting weather patterns that gradually made the climate inhospitable. But there is another, darker explanation for this shift. The text, "The Ship of Ice," recalls the words of the last ship to sail out of Atmora. "The day we made ready to sail, a snow elf came to us, a child dressed in a thin gown, though we shivered in our heaviest furs. She said to us, 'I bring you a message. With your swords and axes you slew our homeland. With the frostfall we have now slain yours. Look upon these frozen shores for the last time, and know that this is the harvest that your fathers sowed, and their fathers before them.' Then she vanished." Whether Atmora was frozen by natural climactic changes, or the vengeful curse of the Snow Elves, we cannot say for certain. But what we know for sure is that it has become a continent hostile to life, and even if a few remote tribes happen to cling on, the frigid wastes are no longer capable of supporting anything that could be called civilization. The next stop on our voyage lies to the east, across the vast expanse of the Padamaic Ocean. Akavir is perhaps the most enigmatic of all the lands of Nirn, for although it has warred with Tamriel in the past, most of what we know about it comes only through wild speculation. Our most detailed source about the people inhabiting this strange land is the text Mysterious Akavir, and although its accuracy has been questioned by scholars, it gives us the most complete picture we have about the people inhabiting this strange land. It claims there are 4 great nations, each made up of its own race of people, who are constantly warring against one another. The first and most famous of these races are the Sayesi, also known as the Snake Men of Akavir. It's said that they are immortal, vampiric, and that they consumed all the men of Akavir long ago. They wield weapons and armor of unique design, and their katanas and segmented armor are a testament to the high quality of their craftsmanship. The Sayesi are infamous in Tamriel for launching the first Akaviri invasion, then later forming the Dragon Guard, the ancestors of the modern Blades. During the Akaviri Potentate, they even ruled over Tamriel in the Emperor's stead, and the Sayesi Potentate Versadu Shay would go on to be one of the longest-lived and most influential rulers in Tamrielic history. However, by the Third Era, they were but a distant memory, and the last Sayesi in Tamriel are thought to have died out long ago. The second major nation in Akavir are the Kamal, also known as the Snow Demons. It is said that they freeze during the winter, only to thaw out in spring. They are notorious for leading the second Akaviri invasion of Tamriel, when they landed in Skyrim and burned the city of Windhelm to the ground. It is said their leader, Adasum Dir Kamal, crossed the sea in search of a mysterious artifact named the Ordained Receptacle. Eventually, the Kamal were defeated by an alliance of Nords, Dunmer, and Argonians. At some point in the Second Era, the remnants of the Kamal invasion force would resurface in Cyrodiil, where they attempted to seize the Imperial city amidst the chaos of the Interregnum. However, this coup ultimately ended in failure, and the last of the Kamal were driven out of the Heartland, never to be heard from again. The Tang Mo are the third nation of Akavir, a monkey folk who inhabit a kingdom of 1,000 isles. Though peaceful, they are more than capable of defending themselves, and must constantly resist the predations of their snake and snow demon neighbours. With peace comes quiet, because little more has ever been heard about these enigmatic people. The fourth and final nation is the Capo-Tun, the Empire of the Tiger Dragon. The Capo-Tun are described as a tiger-like catfolk, presumably similar in appearance to the Khajiit, though it's not known whether the two are related. The Capo-Tun are the great rivals of the Sayesi. While the snake men are stronger at sea, the tiger folk are dominant on land. It is thought that the tiger folk revered the dragons of Akavir, while the Sayesi hated them. The snake men enslaved the red dragons and waged a great war against the Capo Tun and their remaining dragon allies. This left both sides devastated, and all the dragons of Akavir were killed in the fighting. Since then, the tiger folk have tried to turn themselves into dragons. Their emperor, known as Tosh Rakar, is believed to have achieved this feat, as mysterious Akavir claims. He is the largest dragon in the world, orange and black, and he has very many new ideas. First, Tosh Rakar says, is that we kill all the vampire snakes. Then, the Tiger Dragon Emperor wants to invade Tamriel. Though the Akaviri are often depicted as warlike by the people of Tamriel, aggression between the continents runs both ways. In the Third Era, Emperor Uriel V attempted an audacious invasion of Akavir. His forces crossed the ocean and marched into the Sayesi homeland, but quickly became bogged down. The Emperor and his legions were supposedly destroyed at the Battle of Ionith, though the Emperor's death was never definitively confirmed. If you want to know more about Uriel V and the failed invasion of Akavir, I've done a whole video on the topic, which I'll link in the description. If we set sail south of Tamriel, we will eventually come to the mist-soaked southern seas. Here, behind the veil of mist, lies a remote archipelago known as Pyandanir, the home of the sea elves. Few from Tamriel have ever set foot on its shores. Thick mists obscure its islands from view, and its fierce storms are deadly to even the most capable sailors. It's said that the waters are thick with kelp that entangle ships, dragging them down to a watery grave. The few who have returned from the Isles describe them as a sea jungle, with massive plateaus spilling over with vegetation, forming mazes around valleys of ocean. These oceans and jungles are inhabited by many ferocious beasts, such as the lizard bulls, massive, four-legged monsters who wield tridents and feast on the flesh of men. The tropical isles are home to the Meomer, better known to outsiders as the Sea Elves. They are ruled over by Orgnum, an immortal sorcerer king who has reigned over his people since they first settled the Isles. The Meomer were originally elves of Aldmeris, but were exiled after Orgnum led them in a failed rebellion against the established order. As punishment, they were sent beyond the Veil of Mist, so they could never return to Aldmeris and threaten it again. Over time, the Meomer developed into their own distinct culture, and their appearance gradually changed to better reflect their tropical, oceanic home. They became a powerful naval power, building chitinous ships with membranous sails, and even learning to tame great sea serpents to ride into battle. They live in clans, each swearing allegiance to King Orgnum, who they revere as a living god. They are known to practice mysterious arcane arts, such as snake magic, which they use to hypnotize their enemies, or storm magic, which they use to summon winds and waves to decimate enemy fleets. Throughout history, the Meomer have often warred with Tamriel, particularly against the Altmer of the Somerset Isles. There was once a time when Meomer raids on Somerset were an almost annual occurrence, and at other times in history, they have menaced Valenwood and elsewhere. In the early Third Era, a great fleet of the Sea Elves left Pyandanir to invade Somerset, beginning a conflict known as the War of the Isle. The Altmer resisted with the help of the Empire and the Sigic Order, but were unable to repel the superior Sea Elf navy. The invading armada was on the verge of victory before a freak storm sent their ships to the bottom of the ocean, an event some have attributed to the magical intervention of the Sigic Order. Since this humiliating defeat, nothing more has been heard from the Sea Elves of Pyandanir, though there can be no doubt that they are still out there, in their jungle home across the sea, biding their time before they once again set sail to threaten the coasts of Tamriel. The next stop in our voyage lies to the west, across the waters of the Etheric Ocean. Somewhere among the waves is a strange land made up of dozens of shifting islands of coral. But do not let its natural beauty fool you. This is the Kingdom of Thras, home to the slug-like race known as the Slode. And like its masters, this land hides many dark secrets. Thras is made up of isles of shifting coral that rise and fall above the sea, ever changing in number. Some scholars believe this is due to natural tidal forces, but others have suggested it is a result of dark magic practiced by the island's inhabitants. The largest of the isles, Agonio, is the most stable and has even been charted on some Tamrielic maps, which mark it in the Sea of Pearls, west of the Somerset Isles. The Slode are thought to be the original inhabitants of Thras, and have been known to the people of Tamriel since the Merethic era. It's thought that, before the arrival of the elves, the Somerset Isles may also have been part of Thras, as coral ruins can be found along their shores, and even further inland. The Slode are powerful sorcerers, and infamous for their use of necromancy, although they only use these dark arts on other species they deem to be inferior. For thousands of years, the Slode have been the mortal enemies of the Altmer, using necromancy to raise undead minions and enthrall sea monsters to attack Somerset. They have been known to raid the coasts for captives, or buy them en masse from the slave markets of Morrowind, using great gas-filled airships to transport these doomed souls back to their coral kingdom. One escaped captive described the Slode as using undead slaves as their minions, or how they would reanimate them to keep as pets. The Slode's cruelty is not reserved for outsiders, however, and can even extend to their own offspring. Slode begin life as amorphous grubs, born into spawning pools with thousands of others. Those deemed to be too weak are culled, killed and rendered down into Slode soap, which is used to enhance the necromantic rituals of their elders. The Slode are said to have a curious attitude to religion. They favour no gods, but are willing to cut deals with the Daedra if they sense they have something to gain. The book, The Doors of Oblivion, describes human sacrifices made to the Daedra at the 1,000-foot-tall pillars of Thras. The Slode throw their victims from the pillars to be dashed on the rocks below, though some are supposedly snatched away before falling to their death, to become the playthings of the demon lords of Oblivion. Among the people of Tamriel, the Slode are most infamous for unleashing the Thracian plague late in the First Era. It has long been assumed that the Slode used dark magic to engineer this pathogen, using infected sea beasts to spread it to the coasts of Tamriel. From there, it spread like wildfire, and it's said that up to half the continental population perished from the disease. The Slode then used the chaos of the plague to their advantage, invading coastal settlements to carry off survivors for use as their thralls. But the people of Tamriel did not take this lying down. Bendu Ollo, the sailor king of Anvil, formed a grand coalition, pledging to take the fight to the Slugmen and their coral kingdom. This resulted in the formation of the All Flags Navy, the greatest armada in Tamriel's history, bringing together all the peoples of the continent under a united front. They had no delusions about finding a cure for the plague. They simply aimed to end the threat of the Slode, once and for all. Even with all the races of Tamriel working in tandem, the All Flags Navy faced an uphill battle. The Slode were born from the sea, knew every current and tide, and used it to their advantage. One memoir of a Dunmer sailor recalls the horror of facing the Slode and their creatures on the open sea. Great masses of flesh boiled to the surface like blighted whales, spraying ichor from long rows of funnel-like pores. This green bile dissolved sailor and ship alike, and only stopped when we set it aflame. The slugs, bound to the war beasts' backs, hurled spells of such profane power that I hesitate to commit them to the page. Elves clutched their heads, screaming, and only recovered when we boarded the sea beasts and slew the Thracians with blades and harpoons. Following a grueling, bloody campaign, the All-Flags Navy finally stormed the Isles of Thrass, slaying all the Slode they could find. By way of unknown magic, the Coral Kingdom was sunk beneath the waves, and for a time it was thought that the Slode had been exterminated entirely. But by the Third Era, it was reported that Thrass had risen once more from the waves, and that the Slode had been sighted in the waters around Tamriel, watching and waiting for an opportunity to take their revenge. Now, let us leave the Coral Kingdom and head further into the western seas. Soon, great jagged cliffs will loom out of the ocean ahead. This is the shattered shore of Yakuda, the great desert continent, and the ancestral home of the Red Guards. The climate of Yakuda was hot and arid, even more so than the land of Hammerfell, and it gave rise to a great civilization among the sands. Though Yakuda is often thought of as a harsh desert realm, it was far from desolate, and its climate had some green and fertile regions. The poem, The Lost Islands of Old Yakuda, recalls them in detail. Samara, low, lush, welcoming, with many harbours, warm and sweet of fruit. Kanesh, tall, volcanic, harsh, but strong and blazing with inner heat. Yath, jagged, arid, rugged, magnificent, with clear views from a spine like steel. Akos Kazaz, biggest of all, ruler and rebel, moody and many-sided, gentle and brutal. Here, the Yakudans developed a philosophy known as the Way of the Sword, mixing martial powers with the pursuit of enlightenment. Practitioners of this art were known as the Ansei, or sword singers, and the most powerful of them were capable of summoning a spirit sword, known as a Shahai. The Yakudan exiles brought this art with them to Tamriel, but over time it was forgotten, and now persists only as a faded memory. Long ago, the Yakudans came into conflict with a race of Mer known as the Sinistral Elves, or the Left-Handed Elves. After 1,000 years of war, the Sinistral Elves were wiped from the face of the continent by the Yakudans and their sword singers, and their civilization was thus lost to history. For a time, the great Yakudan Empire thrived, said to be even larger than that of Tiber Septim, but it eventually fell into civil war. Waves of Yakudans began the Great Migration to Tamriel, becoming the Ragada, the progenitors of the modern Red Guards. At some point in the 8th century of the First Era, the Yakudan continent is said to have sunk beneath the sea, and eventually vanished into history. Though Yakuda is often described as a lost or destroyed continent, we do have some idea of where it lay on the map, as there were reports of remnants surviving as late as the Third Era, with Yakudan ships even coming to trade in Tamriel. The exact circumstances of Yakuda's downfall are shrouded in myth, and there are conflicting accounts of its decline. Like Atmora, it's possible Yakuda succumbed to climactic shifts, its desert becoming increasingly inhospitable, until its temples and palaces vanished beneath shifting sands. But there are also some stranger explanations for its demise. One legend relates to the Shahai, the mythical power of sword singing wielded by the ancient Yakudans. The out-of-game text, Lord Vivek's sword meeting with Cyrus the Restless, claims that these spirit swords could sever the laws of nature itself. One forbidden technique, known as the Pancrato sword, was even able to cut the Atomos, perhaps analogous to splitting the atom in our own world. During a civil war in Yakuda, the losing faction used this doomsday weapon to try and take their enemies down with them, causing the entire continent to be devastated. Though it was originally only mentioned in out-of-game writings by Michael Kirkbride, this theory was seemingly canonized in ESO. During the quest Assaulting the Citadel, the Celestial known as the Warrior directly states, "The Shahai of a first-rank Ansei sank Yakuda." The idea of a sword nuke is odd enough, but there is another explanation for the fall of Yakuda that's even weirder. If you've been following my Iceberg lore videos, you might not be too surprised by this next bit. The 36 Lessons of Vivec contains a passage where Vivec accompanies Indural Nerevar across the sea to Yakuda, with disastrous results for the continent. They came to the west, where the black men dwelt. For a year they studied under the Sword Saints, and then for another Vivec taught the virtue of the little reward. Vivec chose a king for a wife, and made another race of monsters which ended up destroying the west completely. Yes, you heard that right. Vivec claims to have impregnated a Yakudan king, who went on to birth a race of monsters that destroyed the entire continent. It's possible that this is metaphorical, like so much else in the 36 Lessons, or just an outright fabrication, but we still have to consider that the real weapon of mass destruction was Vivec's empreg fetish all along. Just try not to think about it too hard. If the Elder Scrolls 6 is set in Hammerfell, as many of us expect, then it's possible we will learn more about Yakuda, and perhaps even explore its remaining wonders for ourselves. But in the meantime, we have only whispers and fragments, and can only imagine what secrets might be hidden beneath its sands. There is one more continent we will visit on this journey, though unlike the others, we do not really know in which direction to sail. This is Aldmeris, the mythical lost continent where all elven kind is said to have originated. The few details we do know have been distorted by centuries of myth-making, and there are some who dispute if it ever existed at all. These fragments of knowledge have been best summarised in the Pocket Guide to the Empire, 3rd edition. Translations from the ancient tapestries and texts in the Crystal Tower of Somerset have yielded only the barest of sketches of a beautiful but very strange land. In no representation of Aldmeris are there any trees or life but the Aldmer themselves. It appears always as an endless city, built upon itself over and over again, until no nature remains at all. In Before the Ages of Man, the scholar Akentar of Shimmerine claims that Aldmeri left their Doom continent sometime in the Middle Merethic era, first arriving in the Somerset Isles. The poem, The Lay of Firsthold, corroborates this, claiming the elves first arrived at what is now the city of Firsthold, while also lamenting the loss of the elven homeland. O Aldmeris, old Elnafay, your loving visage haunts us yet. Your Zephyr's kiss enthralls us still, though only in heart's memory, and sorrow to the marrow deep. But if the elven homeland was a paradise, why would the elves choose to leave? Well, it's possible that Aldmeris was destroyed during the Elnafay Wars, the great conflict between the progenitors of the mortal races, a war so terrible it shattered the face of Nirn, causing the continents to take their current shape. There are also those who believe the gods sank Aldmeris, perhaps as a punishment for some transgression committed by the early elves. But one controversial theory, proposed in the out-of-game text, the Numantia Intercept, implies that Aldmeris never really existed at all. Outside of the Dawn, and even then only in the dream time of its landscape, there was never a terrestrial homeland of the elves. Old Elnafay is a magical ideal of mixed memories of the Dawn. Do not believe the written histories. All mortal life started on the starry heart of Dawn's beauty, Tamriel. In this theory, Aldmeris is not a literal place, but a symbol of an idealized past, a lost Eden that can never be regained. This idea is advanced in the ESO text, the ubiquitous Sinking Isle, which extends this idea to Yakuda and other sunken islands of myth. This myth of a lost homeland has become diffused throughout the cultures of Tamriel as a way to explain their origins and deal with the traumas of past disasters. The text reads, "Could it be that the sinking island is not a literal event, but rather a metaphorical one? Thras, Yakuda, and Aldmeris are much more than simple landmasses. They are societal symbols, avatars for a cultural identity lost in time. These lost islands rest at the fault line between fact and parable. There is truth in those tales, certainly, but the true historian knows that not all truth is literal. The myth of the lost continent recurs again and again across cultures of Tamriel that seemingly have nothing else in common. Perhaps these lost lands do not represent places at all, but as a way to explain their origins and idealize the distant past. Atmora, Yakuda, Aldmeris, all are relics of a lost age, cast adrift in the temporal current, their memory warped and distorted with time. And the future, if it belongs anywhere, belongs in Tamriel, the heart of the world. And perhaps this is why the peoples of different continents have been drawn to the allure of Dawn's beauty across the millennia. Whether from Akavir, Atmora, or Aldmeris, they know that Tamriel is where the world will be won or lost. Ultimately, it's unlikely we'll know much more about the lands beyond Tamriel, or even see them with our own eyes. The Elder Scrolls is the story of Tamriel, and the developers are on record as saying they would like to keep the other continents a mystery. But I think it's still possible we'll learn more about the secrets of these mythical lands in future games. And who knows, maybe we'll get the chance to meet some of their inhabitants in person. So for now, all we can do is wait and see. Thank you for watching, and let me know in the comments if I missed anything, or if there's something you'd like to see covered on the channel. My deep dive of Akavir is linked in the video description, and you can join us in reaching the darkest depths of the lore in my Elder Scrolls Iceberg series. But I think I've rambled on enough for one day, so until next time, take care.